Greetings and welcome to this edition of the Pastor's Study. These sermons are being brought to you by the Church of God Seventh-day with headquarters in Salem, West Virginia. If you would like any additional information, please give us a call. Again, at this particular time, I'm sure there are many of you out there that have questions, and we'd be glad to help you understand the Word of God a little bit better, up to and including a ministerial visit. So please contact us if you have any additional informational requests, as it were. I'd like to start out with a little bit of a story, and this week isn't any different. There was a fisherman, and he's fly fishing, and he's just kind of lazily fishing and not really having much success. And one of the locals come by and said to him, like, "Well, how are you doing?" He said, "Not really too well." He said, the local says, "Well, I'm really kind of surprised." He said, "That's really a wonderful stream for trout." And the fisherman said, "I'm sure you're right." He said, "They really like it. They refuse to leave." That's it. No luck at all, right? Just bad luck. Today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about a little bit of a place and a little bit of a background to the life of Jesus. But the place I want to talk about is the Mount of Olives. And there are some references in the New Testament to the Mount of Olives, and it played a role. But it's going to play a significant role in the future when Jesus returns. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of go into a little bit of the background of Jesus Christ, and that's with regard to like some of these locations, right? For the most part, he spent almost his entire life in, I'm going to say, like central Israel. Most of the stories are in and around Israel. I think the only time he traveled outside, now don't hold me to this, but I think the only time he traveled outside of Israel was when he was a baby, and Joseph was told by the angel to take Mary and the Christ child to Egypt. Turn with me, if you would, to Matthew 2. It'll be Matthew 2nd chapter, 13th verse. It says, "And when they," and the they being the wise men. And of course, if we backed up to that, we see that the wise men came to visit Jesus in a house, right? This would be chapter 2, verse 11. "And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child and Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh." So most of the time we see during this past holiday season, as it were, where people have all these mangers, and they show that the wise men visited the Christ child in the manger, and that's not really like the birth of Christ itself. That visit didn't happen at that particular time, and when they finally did get to visit with them, he was in a house. So in 13, "And when they," the wise men, "were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him." Of course, that's when he turns around and he sends the soldiers out to kill all the young children about I think the age of 2 and less, or up to including the age of 2. And of course, this was the innocent children that were killed. He was hoping that they were going to be successful in finding this Christ child, who was purported to be the king of Israel. And he was the king of Israel. Herod was the king of Israel. So when you hear about somebody that wants to take over your position, in a sense, what do? You try to kill the person that's supposedly going to take your place. And so that's what he did. So the angel told Joseph to take Mary and the child to Egypt. In 14, it says, when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, out of Egypt have I called my son. And remember that Abraham came out of Egypt, Israel, the nation of Israel, came out of Egypt, and Christ comes out of Egypt. And Egypt is the type of sin, so they're coming away from sin. And in each of the cases, they're supposed to be heading to, the better place, the promised land. Now we know Abraham didn't get there himself. I mean, he not the promised land like it was talked about later on, and how it was divided up again by, amongst his, his descendants, right? But he was promised, and he went to Canaan, and he was a faithful child of God, as it were, one of the faithful men of old. But he was in Egypt, and he came out of Egypt, and like Israel and the Christ child, the same thing occurred. So he comes back, when Herod dies, he comes back, and we really don't know too much about his young life. We only learn that he was circumcised on the 8th day, like every Jewish child would be. And then the next story, I think, that we read about is the one where he's about 12 years old. And this was when they had gone to Jerusalem. I believe it was for the Passover. Luke 2:39. And what happens in the, the crush of all the people, I think it's, Mary thinks he's with Joseph. Joseph thinks he's with Mary, and they end up finding out that he's not with anybody. So in Luke, if we go to Luke 2:39, it says, and when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee, into their own city, Nazareth. And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. So they went up there. They took Jesus with them. Of course, he's learning. And it's interesting that they use this 12 years old, I think, at this particular time, that when a Jewish boy is 13 or a girl is, I believe, the same age, 13, they have a ritual that they perform, bar mitzvah for the boy, and I believe it's bat mitzvah for the young lady. And during that time, they are required to recite some of the, I believe it's history and probably some of the things that they're supposed to do. I don't know exactly, but they do have to study, and they do have to give an account at that particular time. And so we see here Jesus being 12 years old. What do Mary and Joseph, what do they find out? Well, it goes on to say in 43, and when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. So, they didn't know he was not with the other one, of course. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolks and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. So they've gone away for a day's journey and realize he's not there. So they go back to Jerusalem. And it says, and it came to pass, this would be verse 46, and it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. So this was probably a little bit unusual. They wouldn't expect him to be doing this, but he was. And in 47, it says, and all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And this is what I'm saying. The current time, 13 years old, is like when a child comes of age and they should be starting to mature and realize the importance of their religion, the way they're supposed to live, what they're supposed to do, and what's expected of them and required of them, as an individual. So here Jesus is in the temple and he's bantering back and forth with the, what we would call the learned men. So in 47, and all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. So, it's like, we got upset. We didn't know what happened to you. We thought you were lost. We couldn't find you. And, we're so glad to see you. But, you've kind of caused us a little bit of anguish here. And so then Jesus says to them in 49, he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? And in 50, and they understood not the saying which he spake unto them, and he went down with them, and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. So she, they were astonished. And of course, in 52, it says, And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. So here we have a situation where we realize that Jesus is very learned and has understanding and wisdom, and he's blessed by God, and he's going about doing what he says is his Father's business. Now, that would be God, of course, but we do believe that Jesus was a carpenter. I'm sure he assisted Joseph, learned the trade, knew exactly what to do and how to do it, and did it for approximately, I don't know the actual years, but let's say he started as a very young boy. Let's say he was 10 years old. I don't know. But he did it for maybe 20 years or so. And that's just a guesstimate on my part. So he's doing the things that he's supposed to be doing, but he's also learning the things he's supposed to learn. Now in Mark 6:3, we read about his baptism. I have a reference with 6:3. It says, Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judah and Simon? And are not these his sisters here with him? And they were, offended at him. And the reason being because he didn't have any, what does it say, that you don't have that, people don't believe you, the ones in your own household, in a sense, it's almost like they find you offensive. They don't give you any credit. But this also points out, this verse, that Mary had other children. There's a lot of people who think that, she didn't have any other children. It was almost like, Joseph wasn't supposed to have any relations with Mary, even after she gave birth to Jesus Christ. And that's not true. I mean, this is one of the verses that points out that he had, natural brothers and sisters. Now, these would be the brothers and sisters that were provided by Joseph and Mary. And he grew up with these people. And so this long-held belief that, she was a virgin all her life, that she's a virgin even unto this day, and she's supposed to be worshipped by, a group of people, and that she's going to be able to do things for us. This is just all utter nonsense. She was chosen by God at that particular time, and she bore Jesus, and she gave birth to Jesus, and of course she helped to raise him along with Joseph. And I'm sure that they were selected because they were very, very devout people. And they, God knew that they were going to do right by this, by this Christ child that was brought into the world for us. But to think that they didn't have any more they didn't have any relations. She didn't have any other children, and this is all she had to do. People are just, they're just sadly mistaken. Now, Luke 3, in Luke 3, this is where he gets baptized, and it says here in Luke 3:21, now when all the people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also was baptized, and praying, the heaven was opened, and the Holy Ghost descended in bodily shape like a dove upon him, and a voice came from heaven, which said, Thou art my beloved Son, in thee I am well pleased. And it goes on to say in 23, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. So here, this is basically where what we would call his public ministry is starting. And he does so by this example of being baptized. He didn't need to be, he didn't need to be baptized, but he shows us. Now, Jesus was one of these people, I think I pointed this out before, that Jesus was circumcised when he was a young man on the 8th day, and he was also baptized when he was, at this particular time, almost 30 years of age. So it shows us this transitioning again. We're going from the Israelites to the Gentiles. The Gentiles do not need to be circumcised. The Gentiles need to be baptized. And so he is giving us this example. He's showing us this transition. I was talking earlier today when we were doing our Sabbath school lesson, how God performed mighty miracles for Israel. When Jesus comes along, he starts performing mighty miracles for mankind. He does not. They're not limited to one, group of people. When he comes on the scene in this public ministry mode, and he starts performing miracles, he doesn't make any exceptions. He goes on to perform miracles for many, many people. And this is kind of showing the Israelites. In fact, I think I mentioned this morning that many of the Israelites were upset with him when he started performing these miracles, because it was almost like, he's taking away from us, and we need to do something about this. And so at every single turn, they had something to say, something to ask him, trying to trip him up, trying to attack him, and of course up to and including his betrayal by Judas. And the people at that particular time give up and really say, we don't want to have anything to do with this guy. We turn him over to the Romans to crucify him, and let his blood be on us and our children. They don't realize the terrible mistake that they were making at that particular time. And Jesus is just trying to show them that he's there carrying out his Father's business. And I think we talked about that in past weeks. So he starts, his public ministry, and he's got what we call like the Sermon on the Mount. And from the Sermon on the Mount, he goes to like Capernaum, and he goes to Gadara. Um, Matthew 9:35. He just goes all over, and like I say, most of it is in, it's in central, Israel. And in 9:35, it says, "And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd." So he realized, the people really needed leadership. I think when you consider what had happened to Israel, many mighty miracles were performed in their presence, coming out of Egypt, while they were in Egypt and coming out of Egypt, and even after, even when they were, engaged in some of the battles that we read about, some of the engagements that were necessary for them to take over the promised land. And I think what has happened by the time you get to what we would call the New Testament, they remember all these stories. They talk about the stories, but it's no longer in their heart. I don't know that it was really ever in their heart. Because remember, every time, they turned around, it was like they were murmuring, they were complaining, they were, in the very beginning, it was almost like we want to go back to Egypt. And, when it came to the promised land and they sent out the spies, it was, no, they're too big, they're too many, we can't do it, this is like impossible. It's almost like you and I get to the point where we think that, oh, well, this is something God can't do. Oh, he can't do this. He can't do that. Well, there isn't anything that God can't do. And the Israelites really forgot that. And like I say, when we get up to the New Testament, I think that they no longer remember. They remember it in stories, but it's just stories. And so now what has happened is they have taken over, and they're consumed with the idea that they are God's people. And it's almost like there isn't anything else that matters. We're God's people, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be. When Jesus comes along, he upsets the apple cart. And they believe that he is causing them a lot of problems. They said the same thing about Paul. And so their idea of making everything right is they have to get rid of him. They can't have this. And so instead of humbling themselves and following the Messiah, they don't see him as the Messiah. They see him as a troublemaker, and they don't humble themselves. They feel self-righteous, and it's like, well, we have to get rid of him. We have to do what we believe is correct. So we've got to get rid of this troublemaker. And if we get rid of the troublemaker, then things will be, they'll be okay. But remember, 9:35, Jesus, Matthew 9:35, he went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. There's no exception. He didn't turn around and say, no, I'm sorry, you're not an Israelite. Luke 19:29. We'll just start at 28. It just says, "And when he had thus spoken, he went before, ascending up to Jerusalem. And it came to pass, when he was come nigh to Bethpage and Bethany at the mount, called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples." And that was when he sends the two disciples out to get the donkey, right? The foal of an ass, I guess he says. So he uses the Mount of Olives as it seems to be, and I'll show you one of the verses later, seems to be like almost like, I want to say, headquarters. Now, maybe that's not really correct, but it's like he goes from the Mount of Olives and he goes into Jerusalem. He goes to the temple and he spends time in the temple and he's preaching and he's teaching. And then he goes back to the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives is not too far away from what we know today as the Temple Mount. I think I've related to many of you that when you see sometimes these interviews that take place on the Mount of Olives, they'll be at this certain, it seems like it's some kind of a lookout point. And behind them, you will see the Mount of Olives, and you'll see the golden dome of the dome of the rock. So they're at this vantage point, and I assume from what I see that it is a place where you can kind of look out over, over Jerusalem and over, the temple area. Well, Jesus would go into the Mount of Olives. He would be there, and in some cases we'll see some dialogue between him and his disciples. And it says, then he leaves and he descends and he goes to Jerusalem. He goes into the temple. And so this place is not very, very far away. And I think I said to you before that it's going to become significant in the future. We're going to read the verses where it talks about the fact that when Christ returns, his feet are going to touch down on the Mount of Olives. And then he's going to basically walk into Jerusalem. And there is a gate there, and they have, it's kind of like walled up now, blocked up or bricked up, maybe not bricked up, but it's all closed. And they put that cemetery there, believing that a priest would never come that way. And so it's kind of like a defensive move that they have this cemetery there. But that isn't going to stop what Jesus is going to do at that particular time. So here we are, he's at the Mount of Olives, and he sends these two disciples out to go inquire about the donkey. Matthew 24, 1-3. In Matthew 24, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming in the end of the world? And so it's a similar situation. He's at the temple, he departed from the temple, and then where is he going? He's going up to the Mount of Olives. So this, like I said, it seemed to be a very, like a central point. I use the word headquarters. I mean, he certainly didn't just stay there, because we know that he traveled further north to the Sea of Galilee. He went to Capernaum. He went to different places. He was on the Sea of Galilee. He was on the seashore. He went to a lot of different places, but it was still in and around this kind of like central location. But here we have the Olivet Discourse He's on the Mount of Olives. And what are they doing? It's like they're overseeing. It seems to be some kind of a vantage point. And he is looking out over the temple, and that's what they're doing. And he's telling them what's going to happen in the future. Luke 21. In Luke 21, we're going to go to verse 37 and 38. It says, and in the daytime he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. And all the people came early in the morning to him in the temple for to hear him. So that's what I was saying. It seems like he stayed in the Mount of Olives. He descends early in the morning. He goes to the temple. He preaches and teaches and interacts with the people in the temple area. And then again, that's not the only place, but he seems to be doing some of that. So that it says, and all the people came early in the morning to him in the temple for to hear him. So I picked up on that word abode, right, in verse 37. And in that daytime, right, he was teaching in the temple, and at night he went out and abode in the mount that is called the Mount of Olives. So remember at that one particular time, he said to the young man that he really didn't have any place to lay his head. In other words, no place to call home. At this particular time in his life, I assume that, he lived with Mary and Joseph, up until this particular time before he became, starting his public ministry. So he teaches during the daytime. He goes up to the Mount of Olives, Matthew 26:30. And I thought this was significant. A lot of us remember this from the Lord's Supper. After the Lord's Supper, after he introduces the foot washing, the bread and the cup, because he took things that were at the Passover table and he used them to now show us a new meaning to the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine. And after that particular evening, it says in Matthew 26:30, it says, and when they had sung and hymned, they went out into the Mount of Olives. So again, it seems to have some significance there with regard to a location, a central location. And one of the other things that I found is in Matthew 26:36. And in Matthew 26:36, it says, then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. Now this particular place, Gethsemane, is supposed to be located in the lower portion of the Mount of Olives. And the name, I think I pointed this out to many of you before, is that that name, Gethsemane, means oil press. Now, when you take into consideration that he is here at this location and he is praying, and what happens, right? Well, Luke tells us in Luke 22, Luke 22 and verse 44, it says, now this is the same evening where he's praying in the garden. It says, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And so oil press, the agony that he feels, the the heaviness that he is experiencing at that particular time, I'm sure was very, very pressing on him. But this is the same location. This is, like I said, the lower portion of the Mount of Olives, and here he is. And not only that, this is the place of his betrayal, right? We go to verse 47 and 48 of Luke 22. It says, "And while he yet spake, behold, a multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him," right? Betrayed with a kiss. "But Jesus said unto them, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? When they were about him saw what would follow, they said unto him, Lord, shall we smite with a sword? And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear." Of course. So this is the same time. This is the same area, the Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane, where he's praying, the agony in the garden, the place where he gave the Olivet Discourse, the place that he descended from each, I won't say each and every day, but many days. And he went there from the Mount of Olives to the temple. Now, what's most important about this, that's what he did while he was performing his, what we call the public ministry. Now, if you turn with me to Zechariah 14, Zechariah 14 shows us what I had said to you before, just confirms what I was telling you, that in Zechariah 14, verse 1, "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. And half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle." So it looks like we're going to have a situation in the future where it looks like Israel is going to really be facing a formidable force, and things get a little, I guess, scary in a sense. But it says in verse 4, "And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south." And so you see that while it played this role during his ministry, it's going to really play a more significant role in the future. Because once that happens, he's coming down as that, the warrior, and the saints are coming with him, and they're going to do battle, and nobody's going to stand against him at this particular time. They won't fare very well at all. But we do know it's going to happen there at the Mount of Olives. That's going to be the starting point. A lot of people, they don't understand that Jesus is coming back to this earth, and he is going to lead that army, which is probably something they thought he was going to do when he was here before. But he is going to lead that army. It's going to be at that particular point where he touches down on this earth, and we look forward to it. So until next time, this is Pastor Bud Randall saying goodbye, friends.